From ancient philosophical musings to our modern self-help gurus, the idea of a perfect human has always captivated us. What would that even look like to you? Someone immortal, all-knowing, or just utterly unflappable, impervious to life's slings and arrows?
Yeah, completely unshaken by anything.
Exactly. Today, we're diving deep into a concept as ancient as philosophy itself, yet maybe as relevant as our latest self-improvement trend, the Stoic ideal of the sage.
Indeed. And what's fascinating here, I think, is that while the ideal of the sage sounds absolute, this pinnacle of perfection, the Stoic tradition actually provides a much more nuanced view. It focuses heavily on the journey toward that ideal, which they termed progress or prokopton.
Ah, the prokopton, the
Yeah.
one making progress.
Exactly. It's a journey that, for all its rigor, is arguably far more accessible and practical than simply, magically achieving the ultimate destination overnight.
Right, and it's precisely because this perfect individual wasn't just some vague fantasy, but a very specific, almost intimidating blueprint that the Stoics meticulously engineered. They called this figure the sage, a perfectly wise and virtuous individual, supposedly immune to misfortune, with flawless judgment.
Flawless judgment. Imagine that.
I know. So our core mission for this deep dive, for you listening, is to really unpack this figure. Is this Stoic sage an ultimate guiding ideal, like a beacon inspiring us to reach our highest potential? Or is it an impossibly high, potentially demotivating standard that just sets us up for perpetual failure?
It's a really crucial distinction, and it shapes how we understand the entire philosophy, doesn't it? We'll be dissecting how the Stoics define this ideal in, well, quite exquisite detail, exploring the very fabric of its perfection.
Getting into the nitty-gritty.
Definitely. Then we'll move into the rigorous practical training they recommended to even begin approaching it, examining whether these practices are truly transformative or just, philosophical exercises.
Can we actually do them today?
That's the question. Finally, we'll confront the arguments both for and against its practical attainability and what all of this means for our own lives today, right here, right now, as we navigate our, let's face it, pretty imperfect world.
Okay. We've pulled from a rich stack of sources for this one. Everything from the foundational, sometimes challenging texts of Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius, the titans of Roman Stoicism.
The big names.
Yeah, the big names, to modern scholarly analyses that really help us unpack these ancient ideas and see their continued relevance, maybe. So let's unpack this. This notion of a perfect person is ancient, but the Stoics, they don't just ponder it. They meticulously engineered a blueprint for what they called the sage. And frankly, it's a bit intimidating. Let's start by laying out this blueprint for the Stoic sage, then. What exactly did the Stoics envision when they spoke of this figure? Because it's not just about being a good person, is it? It feels like something far more absolute, far more encompassing.
Absolutely. It completely transcends mere goodness or even excellence as we typically understand it. The core definition of the sage is, well, this individual is not just wise, but perfectly wise.
Perfectly.
Not just virtuous, but perfectly virtuous, with flawless judgment in every single situation, every decision. It's quite something.
Flawless judgment. Wow.
And the sage is, in theory, said to be completely immune to misfortune. It's the absolute pinnacle of human achievement, an absolute ideal, rather than just, being a bit better than yesterday. Think of it as reaching the absolute zenith of human rational and moral capacity.
That sounds like a tremendously high bar. I mean, this all-or-nothing virtue thing feels so counterintuitive to how we typically understand personal growth, which is usually incremental, step by step. Isn't there a risk here that this could actually be incredibly demotivating for anyone who's not already a sage? How do they sort of reconcile that with the idea of a journey?
That's a really perceptive question, and it gets right to the heart of a controversial aspect of ancient Stoicism. The Stoics did claim that virtue itself cannot be a matter of degree. It's an all-or-nothing concept.
All or nothing. Okay.
To use analogies, imagine a line between unique and not unique. Something either is unique or isn't, right? You can't be a little bit unique.
Fair enough.
Similarly, for the Stoics, you either have virtue in its complete, perfect form, or you don't. Now, this doesn't mean progress isn't possible, and this is absolutely crucial.
Okay, good. Because otherwise.
Right. While you either possess virtue or you lack it, you can be closer or further from that state of perfect virtue. This is where the concept of the prokopton, the person making progress, becomes absolutely vital. It offers a pathway.
The path.
Exactly. Most of us, let's be honest, imperfect Stoic moral agents will have, more or less unstable forms of Stoic virtue and happiness. The sage, by contrast, represents the ultimate, stable, unshakable state of perfect virtue and happiness. It's like the fixed point on the horizon guiding the ship.
Okay, the uniqueness analogy really clarifies that all or nothing aspect. I get that. But it still leaves me wondering, how do you prevent that all or nothing standard from becoming just, well, paralyzing? If I'm not a sage, am I essentially failing? How did they make space for the journey itself to be meaningful, not just the end point?
That's precisely why the Stoics emphasize the inseparability of agency, virtue, and happiness. What's fascinating here is the integrated nature of these concepts for them. They truly believe that your agency, your capacity for reason, choice, and action, your sort of internal command
All right,
center,
your decision-making faculty.
exactly. Your agency, your virtue, and your happiness are fundamentally intertwined, like three strands of the same rope. If you are making progress toward ideal Stoic agency, meaning your choices are becoming more rational, more aligned with nature, you are, by definition, also making progress toward virtue and happiness.
Ah, so improving one automatically improves the others.
That's the idea. For the sage, this isn't just progress. It's a complete, stable, and perfectly aligned realization. A person with perfect agency is perfectly virtuous and perfectly happy. An imperfect agent, like, well, most of us, one whose reasoned choices are not flawless, will naturally experience less stable forms of virtue and happiness. So the journey is meaningful because every step you take in improving your agency directly correlates to an increase in your virtue and your inner contentment, even if you haven't reached the sage's absolute perfection.
Okay, that makes more sense. The striving itself has inherent value because it is progress in all areas. So if the sage has perfect judgment and perfect virtue, does that mean they're essentially robots, devoid of emotion? Because that's a classic misconception about Stoicism, isn't it? That they're all just stiff upper lip and no feelings.
Oh, it's a very common, frankly understandable misconception. But the Stoic sage is not emotionless in the modern sense of being cold or unfeeling. Not at all. Rather, the Stoic ideal is to be free from what they called pathy, which are extreme, irrational, and unhealthy negative emotions. Seneca vividly described them as little mental illnesses that sort of take over our minds, causing us distress and clouding our judgment.
Like what counts as pathy?
Think of uncontrolled rage, excessive fear, debilitating grief, intense envy, those kinds of disruptive states. The sage, guided by perfect reason, simply doesn't experience these disruptive pathy. Instead, they experience what are called eupathii, or good feelings.
Ah, good feelings. Okay, eupathia. That's a crucial distinction. Can you give us some examples? How do they differ from regular emotions that might, spiral into pathy?
Certainly. These eupathii are rational, healthy, effective responses. They're rooted in correct judgments and align harmoniously with nature, with reality. They are fundamentally different from the problematic passions. Examples given in the text include things like good intent, eunoin, cherishing, agapan, and welcoming, aspesistai.
Cherishing, welcoming, those sound positive.
They are. But crucially, these aren't wild, uncontrollable urges. They're described as species of boulesis, which is a rational wish or will found only in the wise and the sage. So when the sage cherishes a loved one, it's not a tumultuous, irrational passion that makes them vulnerable to irrational grief if something happens.
Right, not a clingy, desperate kind of love.
Exactly. Instead, it's a deep, rational affection that brings joy, aligns with their understanding of the cosmic order, and promotes appropriate, helpful action. It's an inner state that is controlled, harmonious, and constructive, never disruptive. They feel, but they feel well in a way that contributes to their well-being and rationality.
Okay, that's a much more appealing picture than the emotionless Vulcan stereotype. And what about negative experiences then? If the sage is so perfectly rational, how do they react to, say, suffering or loss? Our sources mention this idea of the absence of present evils for the wise, which sounds, well, almost incomprehensible to us mere mortals.
It is a truly profound, almost mind-bending point in Stoic thought. For the perfectly rational sage, the category of present evils is, in effect, empty.
Empty? How?
This isn't because they're in denial or magically immune to physical pain or loss. Not at all. Rather, from their perspective of perfect understanding and perfect virtue, no true evil can ever actually be present in the external world.
Okay, unpack that. What's a true evil then?
For a Stoic, the only true evil is vice, moral corruption, flawed judgment, acting against reason and nature. Since the sage is perfectly virtuous, they cannot experience vice. Therefore, Things that we typically call evils like sickness, poverty, pain, or even death are considered indifference in the moral sense.
Indifference, right? Not good, not bad, just indifferent.
Precisely. They might be dispreferred indifference, you'd rather not be sick, but they cannot be evil in the way that making a cowardly or unjust choice is evil. So the sage, always acting virtuously and aligning their will with the cosmic will, finds a reason to rejoice in virtuous dispositions and appropriate actions in every moment, regardless of external circumstances.
Wow. So even in pain or loss, there's an opportunity for virtue.
Exactly. Every moment provides an opportunity for virtuous action, for exercising courage, justice, temperance, wisdom. And since virtue is the only good, every moment offers the possibility of good, making the concept of a present evil illogical from the sage's perspective.
That's a radical reframing of suffering. It really shifts the focus entirely inward. So for the sage, virtue isn't just a good, it is happiness itself. Now, this next point is truly radical, and it's where the Stoics really part ways with other ancient philosophies, like Aristotle's. They famously asserted that virtue is happiness. Think about that for a second. It means your internal moral compass isn't just a path to happiness, it is the very definition of it. How profound is that for daily living?
It is indeed profound, and it was a major point of contention. The Stoics argued that virtue alone fully meets all the formal conditions philosophers agreed upon for the highest good. It's the ultimate end. We seek it for its own sake. It's complete. Nothing needs to be added to it. It's self-sufficient. It depends only on us, and it cannot be increased by adding anything else, like wealth or health.
Okay, so it ticks all the philosophical boxes for highest good.
Right. This directly counters someone like Aristotle, who, while valuing virtue immensely, contended that a virtuous life couldn't be complete or truly happy without some measure of external goods, things like health, wealth, good fortune, friends, even good looks to some extent.
Right, Aristotle thought you needed virtue plus a bit of luck, basically. He even mentioned that someone being tortured on the rack, no matter how virtuous, couldn't really be called happy.
Exactly. For Aristotle, a life well lived seemed to require some favorable external conditions. The Stoics pushed back on that with full force. They essentially said Aristotle's inference from his own conditions was completely unwarranted.
So they were saying, Aristotle, you set the rules for the highest good, and virtue alone meets them. You don't need the external stuff added on. This isn't just philosophical hair-splitting, is it? It fundamentally shifts where we are taught to seek our contentment. Aristotle says you need good luck. The Stoics say, nope, it's all within your control through virtue.
Precisely. The Stoics argued that a complete good, the highest good, doesn't inherently need external goods. It is fully achieved by virtue alone.
Yeah.
This is a crucial differentiator not only from Aristotle, but also from, say, the Cynics, who also rejected externals, but perhaps in a different way.
Okay, how did they differ from the Cynics then? Because the Cynics were famous for rejecting material possessions and conventions, right? Like Diogenes living in a barrel. Did the Stoics have anything in common there, or was it totally different?
They certainly shared some ground in their disdain for being enslaved by material excess or societal opinion, but the Stoics were generally far more nuanced, more integrated into society than the often provocative Cynics. This brings us to the important Stoic concept of valuable indifference, or proegmena.
Proegmena, valuable indifference, okay?
These are things like health, wealth, beauty, a good reputation, pleasant circumstances, maybe even having children. The Stoics recognize that these things are naturally preferred. All things being equal, we'd rather be healthy than sick, wealthy than poor, admired than scorned. It's natural to lean towards them.
Makes sense.
However, and this is the absolutely crucial distinction, they do not constitute good or happiness in the strict moral sense. Virtue remains the sole good. These indifference, while preferred, are morally neutral.
So, nice to have, but not essential for the good life.
Exactly. The sage values internal good virtue above all else and is therefore not enslaved by these external advantages. Seneca, for example, a man of immense wealth himself, famously argued that it's perfectly fine to possess and use the gifts of fortune, to enjoy them even, as long as you're not psychologically attached to them, as long as you can let them go at a moment's notice without distress or compromising your principles.
Ah, okay. So you can have the nice things, just don't let the nice things have you.
That's a great way to put it. This clearly sets them apart from the Cynics, who often seem to actively disdain valuable indifference, viewing them almost as inherently corrupting distractions to be avoided entirely.
Mm.
The Stoics preferred them, but saw them as utterly secondary to virtue, the only thing that truly matters for happiness.
That makes perfect sense. It feels like a more workable approach to living in the real world, maybe.
Yeah.
This distinction between good and preferred is absolutely critical because it helps us identify what we truly control and what actually contributes to our inner peace versus what society often tells us we need for happiness. It's like a mental filter for consumerism, for social comparison. Incredibly powerful today, I think.
Definitely.
Now, stepping back for a moment, the sage doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? The sources remind us that they operate within a larger cosmic plan. What's the Stoic view of this cosmic context, and how does it shape the sage's existence and outlook?
That's fundamental to their whole system. The Stoics saw the universe, the cosmos, as a unified, living, breathing whole. It wasn't just random atoms bouncing around. It was permeated and governed by an immanent divine reason, a rational principle they called logos, or sometimes nature or God or Zeus. The terms were somewhat interchangeable.
So, an intelligent universe.
Yes, an intelligent, ordered, and fundamentally benevolent universe, directed by this rational force that ensures everything unfolds according to a coherent plan or fate. Humans, uniquely among creatures on Earth, partake in this divine nature through our own faculty of reason, our highest attribute, seen as a spark of the divine logos within us.
A fragment of God, as Epictetus sometimes put it.
Precisely. Therefore, our proper way of life, our ethical duty, our path to flourishing, is to use our reason to understand and align our personal will, our choices, our proherises, with this overarching cosmic will, with nature. Epictetus, for instance, encouraged us to view ourselves not as isolated individuals, but as a part of some whole.
Like a hand is part of a body.
Exactly. And from that perspective, it becomes fitting, even rational, to accept things like sickness, risk, poverty, or even premature death, if it serves the good of the whole, the overall cosmic order. The sage understands this profoundly and wholeheartedly assents to this order, seeing beauty and rationality in all that unfolds, even things that seem negative from a purely personal standpoint.
So it's not just about individual perfection and isolation, but about playing your part harmoniously in a grand, rational design. And this concept you mentioned, proherisis, that seems incredibly important. Epictetus really hammered that home, didn't he? As the ultimate control panel of one's life, the true locus of freedom.
Yes, proherisis, which is often translated as volition or reasoned choice or moral purpose or the will. It's absolutely central, especially to Epictetus' philosophy, and indeed to the definition of the sage's selfhood and autonomy. It's the sphere of what is truly up to us, our value judgments, our desires, our inclinations, our aversions, basically how we interpret and respond to the world.
Our inner command center.
That's a good term for it. Epictetus believed this faculty is uniquely human, something that even the gods cannot touch or interfere with. It's the untouchable core of our being, and it's where our true freedom and moral responsibility reside. Everything else, our body, our reputation, our possessions, external events, what other people do, is ultimately indifferent and outside our proherisis.
So the sage is someone whose proherisis is perfect.
Essentially, yes. The sage is someone whose proherisis is perfectly aligned with reason and nature, making only correct judgments, forming only rational desires and aversions, perfectly in tune with the cosmic will. This renders them truly free, self-sufficient, and internally unassailable no matter what happens externally.
Okay, so we have this incredible blueprint for the Stoic sage. Perfectly rational, virtuous, happy, internally free, and totally in tune with the cosmos. It sounds, well, almost impossibly high, doesn't it? But if it's an all-or-nothing virtue, as you said, and the sage is so incredibly rare, how do ordinary people like us even begin to approach such an ideal without feeling utterly overwhelmed or just giving up? This brings us to the practical path, right? The path of the prokopton, the person making genuine progress.
This is precisely where Stoicism shifts from perhaps abstract idealization to intensely practical and, I think, profoundly reassuring advice. While the sage is that fixed, ultimate ideal like a lighthouse on a distant shore, the Stoics, especially practical teachers like Epictetus, placed immense importance on the prokopton.
The striver, the learner.
Exactly. This is the everyday achievable focus. It's all about the journey of striving, the continuous effort toward virtue, the incremental steps forward, rather than dwelling solely on the distant, maybe unreachable, perfect goal. It's about the conscious, deliberate process of self-improvement day by day.
So it's less about being a sage and much more about becoming better, constantly striving towards that ideal. Our sources suggest Epictetus himself didn't even dwell much on the term sage directly, preferring to talk about something perhaps more attainable or at least relatable for his students.
That's absolutely right. Epictetus, as a teacher who was primarily preoccupied with the moral training and psychological therapy for his students, rarely referred to the ideal sage using that specific rarefied term. Instead, he often preferred the traditional Greek term kalos kai agathos.
Kalos kai agatos, what does that mean?
It translates roughly as the beautiful and good man, or the excellent man, a more grounded, perhaps, albeit still very high, ideal in Greek culture. He pragmatically urged his students to concentrate on what they could do to make progress now in their daily lives with their present challenges, rather than getting lost in contemplating the unattainable perfection of the theoretical sage.
Focus on the next step, not the mountaintop.
Precisely. And he pointed to figures like Socrates. He didn't see Socrates as merely an approximation of the sage, but as a living paradigm of a genuinely wise person, demonstrating that significant wisdom and thus tangible progress towards the ideal is achievable through rigorous self-examination and consistent practice in the real world. Socrates wasn't perfect, maybe, but he embodied the striving.
And this ties into the idea I think you mentioned earlier about human nature being a developing nature. We're not born perfect or even fully formed, but we're sort of designed to evolve, to mature rationally.
Exactly. Our human nature isn't static. The Stoics saw it as inherently a developing nature. Our original impulses, our basic drives for self-preservation or sociability are natural, yes. But what's truly natural for us, as humans endowed with reason, is to cultivate and hone those impulses through reason as we mature.
So reason isn't unnatural, it's the natural culmination of our development.
That's the idea. It's like we're born with raw potential, maybe like rough stone, and our job, our nature, is to shape it, to sculpt it through intentional effort and the development of reason. This maturing rationality is what gradually leads us toward the moral point of view, refining our judgment, our character, our prohairesis. It means that everyone, theoretically, has the potential for growth, for becoming a prokopton, by actively engaging their rational faculty. It's a call to continuous self-sculpting, if you like.
Self-sculpting, I like that. So what were some of these core Stoic practices then? What did they actually tell people to do to cultivate this virtue and make progress on this path? When we talk about practical Stoic tools today, the dichotomy of control is probably the one that comes up first and most often. Can you break down for us what Epictetus truly meant by that and why it's just so foundational?
It's not just foundational. You could argue it's the absolute bedrock of Stoic practice, the starting point for everything else. Epictetus's fundamental distinction, laid out right at the start of his handbook, is between what is truly up to us, or within our power, teiphamen, and what is not up to us, teukephamen.
Up to us versus not up to us.
Up to us. Essentially, our internal world, our value judgments, what we think is good or bad, our desires, what we reach for, our inclinations, what we move towards, and our aversions, what we try to avoid. Basically, our inner responses and attitudes, the activity of our prohairesis.
And what's not up to us?
Pretty much everything else. Our body, health, sickness, aging, our possessions and wealth, our reputation, external events, the weather, political outcomes. Crucially, what other people think or do, everything outside our direct volitional control.
So almost everything external.
Right. And the Stoics taught, relentlessly, that true freedom, tranquility, ataraxia, and happiness come from focusing solely, fiercely on what is within our volitional control, our judgments and responses. Attachment to externals, or trying to control the uncontrollable, is, as Epictetus starkly put it, a certain recipe for disappointment, anxiety, and unhappiness. It's about drawing a very clear boundary in your mind and investing your mental and emotional energy wisely, only where it can actually make a difference.
It sounds simple, but internalizing that takes work.
Oh, immense work. It's a lifetime practice. But once you start to truly internalize this distinction, so much of life's worry, frustration, and fear begins to dissipate because you realize you were focusing on the wrong things.
Which naturally leads into managing our impressions and thoughts, right? The idea of cognitive distancing, it sounds very modern like CBT, but the Stoics were doing it millennia ago. It's like learning to observe your thoughts rather than just being swept away by them.
Precisely. This is another powerful, almost meditative technique central to Stoic practice. It involves, first, separating our automatic value judgments from external events. It's not the event itself that disturbs us, but our judgment about it. And second, gaining cognitive distance from our thoughts and impulses as they arise.
How do you do that? How do you get distance?
Marcus Aurelius gives us a great example. He famously advised himself, when a troubling thought or a strong desire arises, to pause and say to it, "You are just an impression, Fantasia, and not at all the thing you claim to represent.
Like challenging it directly. Are you really true?
Exactly. It's like putting that thought or impulse on a stage, shining a spotlight on it and asking, is this true? Is this rational? Is this helpful? Does this align with justice and my core values? This practice helps weaken the urge to automatically assent to or act on unhealthy desires or disturbing emotions by observing them detachedly, almost as if they belong to someone else, before deciding whether to endorse them.
Creating a pause.
Yes, it's about submitting every impulse, every impression, to the scrutiny of reason and justice, protecting your clear, rational convictions, rather than being bounced around, as Marcus put it, by disordered automatic reactions. It's about creating that crucial pause between stimulus and response, a space where reason and freedom can flourish.
So not just letting your mind run wild on autopilot, but actively filtering and questioning your reactions, becoming the gatekeeper of your own mind. That sounds incredibly empowering. And what about tackling specific bad habits or cravings that seem to have a life of their own, the ones that are really hard to shake? The sources mention something called functional analysis of desires. What's that about?
This is a very practical, almost therapeutic exercise that anyone can do, and it shows up in Stoic influence thought. It involves systematically writing down or at least carefully thinking through the short-term and long-term pros and cons of particular habits or cravings.
Pros and cons list. Okay.
Yeah, but with a specific focus. Let's say you're struggling with procrastination, or maybe overeating or getting angry too easily. In the short term, the pro of procrastinating might be immediate relief from the discomfort of the task. The con might be a nagging feeling of guilt. But the long-term analysis is where the Stoics really hit hard.
What are the long-term consequences?
Exactly. Long-term pros of chronic procrastination, probably zero. Long-term cons, missed opportunities, chronic background stress, damage to reputation, regret, diminished self-worth. The goal is to clearly see how these actions truly play out over time, cutting through the allure of immediate gratification or relief.
Seeing the bigger picture.
Yes, and even more powerfully, the Stoics encouraged vivid visualization, picturing the negative consequences of indulging the bad habit in graphic detail, really feeling the potential future pain or regret, and conversely, picturing the positive effects of refraining the peace of mind, the sense of accomplishment, the improved relationships. They even use analogies like Hercules at the crossroads, visualizing two divergent paths stretching out before you and imagining where each one might lead you months or even years into the future. This helps to reframe the desire in a rational context, making the rational, virtuous choice much more appealing and emotionally resonant.
I love that idea of a mental crossroads. It really brings home the long-term impact of our seemingly small daily choices. And beyond these sort of immediate mental techniques for dealing with impulses, I recall Seneca also advocating for a more reflective, perhaps daily practice to consolidate learning and solidify these changes. What did he recommend there? The journaling.
Yes, Seneca was a great proponent of regular self-examination, particularly through reflective journaling, especially at the end of the day. He advocated a practice of nightly review for achieving sound sleep and peace of mind. Imagine sitting down quietly before bed, maybe after the house is quiet, and reviewing your entire day.
What would you review specifically?
The components, as he describes them, included reflecting on your actions and words throughout the day, examining them against your principles. Crucially, doing this with self-compassion, recognizing that past actions are already done, out of your control now, but focusing on learning from any mistakes without harsh self-condemnation. What bad habit did I cure myself of today? What fault did I resist? In what way am I better?
Asking yourself those direct questions.
Right. And then, importantly, generating action plans for improvement for the next day, identifying specific behaviors or judgments you want to work on. And also, crucially, acknowledging your successes, however small. This isn't for self-congratulation or vanity, but to reinforce virtuous behavior, to understand what went right so you can repeat it, to learn from your own positive experiences, and ultimately to derive a sense of good, of value from the day, regardless of external outcomes. As he wrote, "When the lamp is taken away and my wife, already knowing my habit, has fallen silent, I examine my entire day and retrace all my deeds and words." It's a powerful, structured self-audit for continuous growth.
A daily check-in with your own progress. That sounds really valuable. Beyond these daily practices for refining character, the Stoics also explicitly train themselves for the bigger, tougher challenges in life: adversity, loss, impermanence, particularly the fear that underlies so many others, the master fear of death. How did they train their minds to face something so universally dreaded?
They absolutely consider the fear of death to be the master fear, perhaps the root of many other anxieties like fear of illness, fear of loss, even excessive ambition sometimes. Seneca argued quite forcefully that once we rid ourselves of this primal fear, or at least significantly diminish its power, other fears lose much of their hold over us.
How do they propose doing that? Just telling yourself not to be afraid?
Not just telling, but fundamentally reframing and practicing acceptance. The wise person, Seneca argued, dies with the same contentment and acceptance as they had at birth, recognizing death not as an evil, but as a natural process, an indifferent event, part of the cosmic plan. It's about accepting mortality as an inescapable, neutral part of nature, a natural transition, not a catastrophe.
So meditating on its naturalness.
Yes, and practicing acceptance in smaller ways daily. Epictetus, in a poignant and often misunderstood piece of advice, suggested that when embracing a loved one, a child, a partner, a friend, we should quietly remind ourselves that we are kissing a mortal.
That sounds harsh, almost cold.
It can sound that way initially, but the intent isn't to be morbid or to diminish affection. It's the opposite in a way. It's to foster a realistic acceptance of impermanence, which paradoxically allows for deeper appreciation of the present moment without the destructive clinging born of fear. It aims to reduce the potential for intense, irrational distress when they are inevitably taken from you, as he puts it, by the natural course of events, whether through separation or death. It prepares the mind for the inevitable, allowing us to cherish the present without being paralyzed by the fear of future loss.
Okay, I see. It's preemptive cognitive reframing. And what about physical pain, which can feel so immediate, so all-encompassing, so hard to be rational about when you're in the thick of it? Marcus Aurelius had specific, almost surgical techniques for dealing with that, didn't he?
He really did. Marcus Aurelius provided vivid, almost clinical strategies for managing pain, viewing it primarily as a psychological challenge as much as, or even more than, a purely physical one. He advised mentally confining the pain to the specific part of the body affected, viewing it objectively, almost like a detached observer.
Like isolating it mentally.
Exactly. He advised breaking it down into its constituent parts, its individual sensations, rather than allowing it to dominate the entire mind, the entire self. He'd ask himself, is it a prickling sensation, a throbbing? Is it localized here, or is it spreading? Is this sensation truly unbearable, or is my mind adding to it? His core insight was profound and remains central to modern pain psychology. Our attitude towards pain, our judgment about the pain, not the raw sensation itself, is what largely determines how upset we become.
So it's the story we tell ourselves about the pain.
Precisely. Pain, Marcus noted, is neither unendurable nor everlasting if you keep its limits in mind and do not add to it through your own imagination. You refuse to assent to the judgment, this is terrible, or I can't stand this. You just observe the sensation. This makes it one of the main therapeutic tools in the Stoic approach. It's not the pain that truly harms or upsets us, but our judgment about the pain.
It's one thing to talk about these ideals and practices in theory, but it's definitely another to see them in action, especially under pressure. Our sources give us some incredible real-world examples of Stoic progress and virtue being lived out. Let's talk about Cato the Younger first. He seems like a figure of almost mythical integrity in Roman history.
Cato the Younger is a prime, maybe even stark example of Stoic principles lived out unflinchingly in the brutal, corrupt crucible of late Republican Roman politics. He was renowned, even by his enemies, for his ironclad integrity and selflessness in public service. He stood firm against the rampant bribery and moral decay of his era.
How did that manifest in practice?
Well, imagine a high-ranking politician today who actively rejected all the usual trappings of wealth and status. Cato often refused to wear the expensive purple-bordered toga expected of his rank, sometimes going barefoot in public. He shunned perfumes and luxuries. He declined offers of armed guards. During military campaigns, he famously insisted on walking while his officers rode, eating the same rations as his soldiers, and even sleeping in the trenches alongside them, rather than seeking comfort.
Wow, leading by extreme example.
Absolutely. His conduct was so unwavering, so defiantly simple and virtuous, that it reportedly shamed other powerful, corrupt figures of his time. It demonstrated powerfully that virtue wasn't just a philosophy for the quiet study or the lecture hall, but a potent force capable of challenging the status quo in the messy arena of public life. He consistently chose hardship and principle over comfort and political compromise, often to his own personal and political detriment, but always with unshakable integrity right up to his principled suicide rather than submit to Caesar's tyranny.
A truly hardcore Stoic. And then there's Marcus Aurelius himself, the emperor who wrote Meditations while on campaign. He faced some truly monumental challenges during his reign plague, wars, rebellion. Our sources highlight his actions during the devastating Antonine Plague and later the attempted coup by Avidius Cassius, revealing an almost superhuman level of self-control and principle.
Marcus Aurelius's actions as emperor are indeed remarkable demonstrations of Stoic leadership and practice, really embodying the sage's calm rationality and commitment to the common good amidst absolute chaos. During the Antonine Plague, which killed millions across the empire, he made the courageous decision to remain in Rome, the heart of the epidemic. He didn't flee to safety. He stayed, steadfastly reassuring his terrified people by his mere presence, despite the terrifying personal danger to himself and his family.
That took guts. And what about funding the wars?
When the empire's treasury was completely depleted by constant wars on the frontiers and the economic impact of the plague, rather than resorting to crippling taxes on the populace or looting provinces, Marcus made the extraordinary decision to hold a public auction in the Forum of Trajan, selling off priceless imperial treasures, gold plate, jewel-encrusted goblets, silk robes, even his wife's gowns to fund the military campaigns.
Selling the crown jewels, essentially.
Pretty much. And then, perhaps even more strikingly, after the financial crisis had passed, he reportedly offered to return the purchase price to anyone who voluntarily brought back the items they had bought, demonstrating a profound sense of justice, fairness, and perhaps trust in his people.
Incredible. And his reaction to the rebellion by Avidius Cassius, a general who tried to usurp him.
That's perhaps the most stunning example of his Stoic principles in action. When Avidius Cassius, a brilliant and previously loyal general in the East, falsely believing Marcus had died, declared himself emperor and launched a coup, Marcus's reaction was astonishingly restrained and philosophical. He saw it not primarily as an act of personal betrayal to be avenged with fury, but almost as a philosophical problem, an opportunity, as he reportedly said, to forgive a man who has wronged one. He showed remarkable leniency toward Cassius's collaborators after Cassius was killed by his own officers. He even famously refused to look at Cassius's severed head when it was brought to him, saying it was not a spectacle fit for an emperor, and ordered it buried with respect. He emphasized dealing with the aftermath of this civil war in a right way, exhibiting profound compassion, dignity, and adherence to principle, even towards an enemy who had tried to destroy him. A true attempt at sage-like action on the throne.
Those are incredibly powerful examples from the highest levels of Roman society, really demonstrating stoicism under extreme pressure. But what about a more everyday demonstration of progress, something perhaps more relatable for people not facing plagues or rebellions? Musonius Rufus, another great Stoic teacher, Epictetus's own teacher, in fact, had a student who provides a great illustration of the prokopton in daily life.
Yes, Musonius Rufus's description of one of his exemplary students offers a deeply relatable, yet still profoundly inspiring, picture of Stoic progress in ordinary life, far removed from the dramatic stages of battlefields or imperial palaces. This unnamed aspiring philosopher apparently committed himself to helping his father in every practical way possible. He was conspicuously self-disciplined in his habits, courteous and fair to everyone he interacted with.
What else stood out about him?
Musonius noted he was never quarrelsome, never rash in his judgments or actions, never rebellious against reason or duty, and remarkably never seemed to get angry. He demonstrated clear control over his appetites, eating simply, drinking moderately, avoiding unnecessary luxuries. And perhaps most importantly, he showed consistent bravery and resilience, not just in facing major disasters, but in enduring the mundane hardships and pains of everyday life with equanimity and good cheer.
So it wasn't about grand gestures, but consistent character.
Exactly. These weren't just theoretical virtues he talked about. They were demonstrated through his consistent actions within his family, his community, his daily routines. He illustrated how Stoic principles manifest not just in crisis, but in a well-lived, ethical, balanced, and considerate life. He wasn't presented as a perfect sage, perhaps, but he was certainly held up as a model prokopton, someone making real, admirable progress on the path.
So we've painted this vivid picture of the Stoic sage, the ideal, and the demanding yet incredibly rewarding path of the prokopton, the striver. But let's circle back now to our central, overarching question for this deep dive. Is this sage an attainable reality, a goal we can truly actually reach? Or is it, ultimately, just an idealized dream, a philosophical construct that remains tantalizingly out of reach for us mere mortals? The Stoics themselves seemed to wrestle with this very tension, didn't they? Seneca, for instance, even while defending the ideal, admitted its extreme rarity.
Yes, this is really where the rubber meets the road, philosophically and practically. Seneca, in his essay on the constancy of the wise person, explicitly addressed critics who thought the ideal was simply too high, too detached from messy human reality, just pie-in-the-sky thinking. He countered them quite forcefully, stating that the Stoics do not invent him as an unreal glory or conjure up a mighty shadow of an untruth. The ideal is real, he insisted, theoretically possible according to human nature, properly understood and perfected.
So he defended its reality.
But he immediately followed that defense with a significant concession. He candidly acknowledged the sage may perhaps be uncommon and only one appears at long intervals. Some interpretations even suggest he thought maybe only Socrates and Cato came close, or perhaps Hercules in myth. This strongly implies that while the ideal is theoretically real and coherent within their system, its full attainment is exceedingly, exceptionally rare, if not practically impossible for the vast majority of human beings. It's presented more as an exception, a limit case, not the expected rule for humanity.
Like finding a black swan, maybe even rarer. And Epictetus also seemed to lean much more into the realistic side of things, didn't he? His focus seems so heavily weighted towards the progress, the journey, rather than the full, perfect attainment of this infallible wisdom.
Exactly. Epictetus, as we discussed, being a hands-on teacher focused intensely on the moral training and psychological therapy needed for his students right now, generally eschews their most paradoxical formulations, as one scholar puts it. He tended to avoid dwelling on the more abstract, absolute, and potentially discouraging pronouncements of some earlier Stoics,
Like what kind of pronouncements?
like the infamous equality of all faults. The idea that technically stealing a loaf of bread is just as bad as committing treason because both represent a failure of reason, deviation from perfect virtue, or the stark claim that ignorance and misery encompass everyone who has failed to achieve infallible knowledge, meaning pretty much everyone except the sage is equally wretched.
Yeah, those sound pretty harsh and maybe not super helpful for motivating beginners.
Right. Epictetus's emphasis was squarely, relentlessly on progress, on the continuous, diligent journey toward virtue, on the small victories won each day. He presented Socrates not as an unattainable myth sitting on a pedestal, but as a paradigm, a working model, for what is genuinely wise and achievable in human terms, a real person whose unwavering dedication to self-examination and living virtuously produced a profound, practical wisdom that others could aspire to emulate through similar effort.
So there's a definite practical acknowledgement of human limitations, even within Stoicism itself, especially in the later Roman writers we have the most access to. And our sources also point to some deeper philosophical and maybe even empirical challenges that make the full sage ideal incredibly difficult, if not strictly impossible, for actual human nature as we know it. One of the most poignant, I think, is the challenge of universal empathy or concern.
This is a profound and very human challenge to the absolute perfect rationality and benevolence often attributed to the sage. Philosophically and perhaps even empirically based on modern psychology, humans seem physiologically and psychologically incapable of feeling the exact same degree of pain, grief, or empathy for every single misfortune happening across the globe as they do for tragedies affecting their own children, family, or close friends.
You mean we just can't care equally about everyone?
Not in terms of raw emotional intensity, it seems. To genuinely feel truly, deeply sorry and distraught for every single life lost on the planet every day with the same gut-wrenching intensity we might feel when our own child or parent dies. Well, that's simply inhuman in the sense that it would likely lead to complete emotional burnout and paralysis. Our emotional capacity is finite, and our empathy naturally, perhaps necessarily, diminishes with psychological and physical distance. This is the idea behind Heracles' famous Stoic image of concentric circles of concern.
The circles of concern.
Yes, starting with the self, then immediate family, extended family, local community, fellow citizens, and finally all of humanity. The goal was to try and draw the outer circles inwards, to extend our sense of fellowship, but the starting point acknowledges a natural gradient. So, while we absolutely can and should develop equanimity, rational compassion, and a broader, more inclusive perspective, the goal is likely a reasonable and rational response to global suffering, leading to appropriate helpful action where possible, not an identical emotional overload that would incapacitate us entirely. To demand perfectly identical emotional responses for everyone, everywhere, might be to demand a breakdown of our very nature.
That makes a lot of sense. Otherwise, we'd just be paralyzed by the sheer weight of global suffering and unable to function, let alone act virtuously towards those we can help. Another really deep tension within Stoicism, one that scholars still debate endlessly, is the one between their concept of determinism or fate and the possibility of genuine human freedom and responsibility. The Stoic universe is governed by this inescapable law, this logos, by a kind of fate. Yet we're told we're responsible for our choices. How on earth do they reconcile that profound paradox?
This is arguably one of the most intricate, challenging, and debated aspects of Stoic philosophy, especially for modern readers raised on different assumptions about free will. The Stoic universe is indeed fundamentally determined by law, by immanent logos. They believed everything that happens, from the largest cosmic events down to the smallest detail, is part of a rational, unbreakable chain of cause and effect, preordained by divine reason.
So everything is fated, destiny.
In a sense, yes, in terms of external events and the unfolding sequence of reality. This inevitably creates a major tension. How do you reconcile this factual necessity, nature as destiny, with the very strong Stoic emphasis on inner freedom, individual responsibility, and the moral weight of our choices? It can sound, at first glance, like we're just puppets pulled by the strings of fate, making all their talk about virtue and effort meaningless.
Yeah, if it's all fated anyway, why bother trying?
That's the challenge they had to meet. The Stoics tried to overcome this, primarily through the work of Chrysippus, by drawing a sharp distinction. They argued that while external events and our own natures are determined parts of the causal web, our assent to impressions, our internal judgments, the decisions made by our prohäresis, remains free and therefore morally significant. We cannot control what impressions hit our senses or what happens to us, but we absolutely control how we interpret and respond to those impressions and events. Our virtue or vice lies entirely in the quality of that assent.
So fate determines the script, but we choose how we react to our lines.
That's a common analogy, yes. They aimed for a disposition, developed through training, that would be in complete accord with the factual and moral order of things, where our free will willingly, rationally embraces and aligns with the cosmic will, with fate. You assent correctly to what is true and act appropriately based on that assent. However, even with this ingenious compatibilist solution, the intricate interplay between determined fate and individual freedom remains a complex philosophical knot. It certainly places immense responsibility squarely on our internal choices, our judgments, even if the external world is seen as unfolding according to a set plan.
That's a fascinating and challenging paradox to hold in your mind. It
Right.
requires real mental gymnastics. And it seems like our modern understanding of Stoicism, particularly when people just pick up, say, Meditations or Epictetus's Handbook without broader context, might be skewed a bit. Because of the specific nature of the sources we have most readily available from that later Roman period, does that mean we might be missing crucial elements of their original, more systematic philosophy if we only read those popular texts?
That's a really crucial point for anyone wanting to seriously study or practice Stoicism today. Many of the widely available texts from the Roman imperial period, Epictetus's Discourses and Handbook, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, Seneca's Letters and Essays, are incredibly valuable, inspiring, and practical, especially for moral training and therapeutic insights. They are classics for a reason,
Right.
but they can indeed be somewhat misleading when read in isolation from earlier material, as scholars often point out. These later texts are generally less systematic. They focus much more heavily on ethics, practical application, self-improvement techniques, and personal reflection. They often assume a background knowledge of the underlying system that the reader may not have.
So what are we missing?
We're potentially missing the full picture of the broader, highly technical, and deeply interconnected Stoic philosophical framework, which originally encompassed not just ethics, but also detailed theories of logic, including epistemology, how we know things, criteria for truth, and physics, their term for natural science, covering cosmology, theology, determinism, the nature of the soul. These foundations were meticulously developed by earlier Greek Stoics, like the founder Zeno, Cleanthes, and especially the brilliant systematizer Chrysippus, whose works are sadly almost entirely lost, except in fragments quoted by later authors. Without understanding the underlying physics, like the nature of the logos, the deterministic cosmos, the material soul, and the logic, like their theory of impressions and assent, some of the ethical principles can seem ungrounded, arbitrary, or even contradictory when encountered in isolation in the later texts. To truly grasp the depth, coherence, and reasoning behind Stoicism, engaging with the full range of its historical development, including the fragmentary evidence for the early Stoa, is pretty important.
That's a really good reminder for serious students of the philosophy. So let's bring it all together. What does this all mean for us today, listening to this? If the sage is this incredibly high ideal, maybe impossible to fully achieve, maybe based on a cosmology we don't share, what's the practical wisdom in even striving for it? Does it just become a demotivating standard, setting us up for failure, or is there something else entirely going on with this ideal?
I really don't think it has to be demotivating at all. In fact, approached correctly, I think it's quite the opposite. Consider Seneca himself, who we discussed earlier. Here was a brilliant advocate of inner freedom, detachment from externals, and living simply, who was also one of the wealthiest men in Rome and wielded significant political power as Nero's advisor. He was, quite understandably, accused of hypocrisy during his lifetime for this perceived contradiction.
Yeah, practice what you preach, Seneca.
Exactly. But his defense perfectly illustrates a key Stoic principle that gets to the heart of the sage ideal's practical value. He argued, essentially, that it's perfectly acceptable to possess and even use the gifts of fortune, like wealth or influence, as long as one is not enslaved to them, as long as they don't own you.
It's the internal attitude again.
Precisely. His defense highlights that the internal disposition, your prohairesis, your judgment about these things is absolutely paramount. It's not about the externals you possess or don't possess, it's about your attitude towards them, your psychological detachment from them, your readiness to let them go at any moment without internal disturbance or compromising your virtue. So the sage ideal isn't about mandating poverty or powerlessness. It's about achieving an inner state of indifference towards those things, recognizing virtue as the only true good. Seneca argued he was using wealth virtuously, not being controlled by it. Whether he succeeded is another question, but the principle is clear.
Okay, so the value is fundamentally in the journey, maybe, not just the theoretical destination. The act of striving itself, guided by that ideal, is what really matters and what changes us, not some perfect arrival, which might never happen. It's all about the path of the prokopton, the one making progress.
Precisely. I think the recent and quite remarkable growth of modern movements, looking at Stoicism not just academically, but as a practical guide to living well, to building resilience and character, shows its continued relevance. It's resonating not because people expect to become perfect sages overnight, but because it offers a practical, robust, and psychologically astute framework for self-improvement, for navigating adversity, for finding meaning. Ultimately, the profound value of the sage ideal might not lie in actually reaching it, which, as Seneca himself noted, is exceedingly rare, if it ever happens at all, but in the rigorous, self-aware, intentional striving it inspires. It functions as an ideal for conduct and character, as something we ought to achieve, as one scholar phrases it. It's a moral compass, a north star, guiding our efforts, not necessarily a destination everyone is expected to reach. The pursuit itself transforms us, makes us better, even if perfection remains elusive.
And it provides a deeper understanding, doesn't it? A why behind the what of ethical behavior, connecting it to something larger.
That's absolutely it. The Stoics weren't just giving a list of rules or virtues. They aimed not just to tell us what to do, be virtuous, be rational, accept fate, but why it matters. They connected personal action, personal ethics, to a broader cosmic context, to universal principles, to the very nature of reality as they understood it. Understanding these underlying reasons, the interconnectedness of virtue, agency, reason, and happiness, the nature of the logos, empowers us to make more deliberate, more rational, more resilient choices in our own lives. It helps us try to align our will with the natural order of things, even if perfect sagehood remains a distant, maybe unattainable horizon. It gives purpose and meaning to our daily struggles and aspirations for self-improvement. Outro in.
Well, we've taken a really deep dive today into the Stoic ideal of the sage, this fascinating figure of the perfectly wise and virtuous human being. We've seen it defined as an absolute, almost intimidatingly flawless pinnacle of humanity, where virtue literally is happiness itself, and where disruptive emotions are not just suppressed, but fundamentally transformed into these perfectly rational, good feelings, the eupathei.
And yet, alongside that absolute ideal, we've also explored the profound importance the Stoics placed on the journey, the relentless, practical, daily progress of the prokopton, the striver. We've looked at powerful, enduring practices like the dichotomy of control, cognitive distancing, functional analysis of desires, and reflective journaling.
Yeah, tools we can actually use.
Exactly. And we've seen inspiring, tangible examples in figures like the principled Cato the Younger and the philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius, demonstrating how this demanding philosophy can actually be lived, not just theorized about, even under the most challenging circumstances imaginable.
But we've also grappled with the inherent tensions and the very real practical limitations, haven't we? The Stoics' own acknowledgement of the sage's rarity, the sheer difficulty, maybe impossibility, of perfect universal empathy for beings like us, and that thorny philosophical knot of determinism versus our inner freedom and responsibility. It seems pretty clear that even for the Stoics themselves, especially the later ones, the sage was less of an everyday reality to be encountered on the street, and much more of an uncommon, almost mythical figure, a guiding star perhaps, more than a destination.
And maybe that leads us right to the heart of its enduring value. Even if the sage is rarely, if ever, fully realized in human form, Its detailed definition provides what one scholar called a calculus for normative logic, a specific, rigorous, coherent standard of conduct and character that we ought to strive towards. It functions as a compass for living well, providing direction and profound purpose for our efforts, rather than being a destination everyone necessarily reaches or even expects to reach. It's the standard against which we can measure our own progress, our own striving.
So what does this all mean for you as you navigate your own life, your own challenges? Perhaps the key takeaway is that the Stoic Sage isn't really about achieving some kind of rigid, static perfection, an impossible mark to hit that just makes you feel inadequate. Maybe it's much more about embracing the profound, lifelong commitment to growth, to reason, to virtue, in the face of life's inevitable difficulties and our own imperfections.
It's about constantly striving, continually working to improve your judgment, trying to align your inner world, your prohairesis, with the rational order of the cosmos, as best you can understand it.
It's about being a prokopton through and through, finding dignity, meaning, and even a kind of happiness in the relentless, conscious effort itself.
Indeed, it really is a call to continuous self-improvement, acknowledging our human flaws and limitations while still reaching for the highest possible ethical and rational standards we can conceive of, knowing perhaps that the true virtue is found in the striving itself and the quality of the journey.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Is the ultimate wisdom to be found in the theoretical perfection of the Stoic sage, or is it actually located in the relentless, imperfect, and deeply human act of continually striving towards that ideal, knowing full well we may never fully arrive? What do you think? Something to ponder. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.